The prisoner's final wish was to see his victim. What happened next broke everyone. The glass was cold, and the room smelled like bleach and metal. The prisoner in the orange suit stood still, hands cuffed in front, ankles chained, head bowed like he was praying. His name was Luke Carter. He was 29, tall, and tired-looking, like someone who hadn't slept for years. On the other side of the glass sat a small crowd. Guards, the warden, a quiet woman in a gray sweater, and two men in suits. Cameras blinked red. The clock on the wall ticked like a heartbeat. Luke lifted his head. His voice shook, but was clear. "My final wish," he said, "is to see my victim." A door opened. An old woman walked in. Her hair was silver white and braided back. Her name was Eleanor Hayes, and everyone called her Miss Ellie. She held a rosary in one hand, not to show off, but to hold on to something steady. She took a slow breath and sat closest to the glass, right where Luke could see her eyes. He looked at her the way thirsty people look at water. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "Ma'am, I'm so sorry for your son." Miss Ellie's hands trembled. The room got even quieter. A guard near the wall shifted his weight and then froze again. The clock kept ticking. Luke closed his eyes. "I need to tell you something. Everyone in this room needs to hear it." He opened his eyes and pressed his cuffed hands to his chest. "I did a lot of bad things. I'm not denying that. I broke into homes. I took what wasn't mine. I was angry and foolish, and my anger hurt many people, including you. But the night your son, Daniel, died, it wasn't me who did it. I was there," he said, and the words fell like stones, "but I didn't pull the trigger." One of the men in suits stood up. "We should stop this," he said to the warden. "Sit down," Miss Ellie said. Her voice was soft but sharp, like a bell. "Let him speak." Luke's hands shook harder. His throat worked like he was fighting tears or trying not to drown. "The man who killed Daniel," he said, "is—" The lights flickered. The clock stopped for half a breath. Something slammed in the hallway. A shout echoed. Every head turned, every body tensed. Luke pressed closer to the glass as if trying to climb through it with his eyes. "His name is—" A siren burst to life somewhere deep in the prison, loud enough to shake dust from the vents. Guards grabbed radios. The warden stepped forward. Miss Ellie's rosary slipped and hit the floor. In the red and white flash of the alarm, Luke's mouth formed a name no one could hear. Then the room went dark. Eleanor Hayes grew up in a small Ohio town where the grocery store still had a bell on the door, and everybody knew who liked their milk whole and who liked it skim. Her father taught her to fix a fence with wire and patience. Her mother taught her to fold grief like a blanket. Don't throw it away. Don't let it smother you. Just keep it close and carry it when you need to. Ellie married young and buried young. She lost her husband, Frank, to a heart that broke quietly while he was fixing a leaky sink. After that, she found a job at the elementary school library. She read out loud to children until her voice cracked. She smiled at everybody, but at night, she sometimes cried at the sink the way her husband once did. Her boy, Daniel, was her light. He had big hands, a gentle laugh, and a way of taking care of other people without making them feel small. He'd mow a neighbor's yard and pretend he was just testing the mower. He'd buy 2 burgers and somehow only eat one. When his dad died, Daniel started working part-time at a hardware store, stacking boxes, learning to fix things, bringing home new screws and little ideas. "Mama," he would say, "broken doesn't mean over. It just means we know where to start." On a winter night 2 years before the prison meeting, someone broke into Miss Ellie's house. The front door frame snapped. The cold came in like smoke. There were shouted words that didn't fit in a home. There was a sound no home should hear. When the police lights painted the living room blue and red, Daniel lay still on the floor, and the world felt like it was tipping into a hole. Ellie pressed her palm to her boy's cheek and learned how to breathe inside thunder. The police did their work. A neighbor's camera saw a car, a print on a broken frame. A loop of street video caught a tall man with a hood. An officer said a name, Luke Carter. There were 3 burglaries that winter. Luke had been seen with the wrong crowd. His fingerprints were in the house. Everyone said, "That must be him." And Ellie sat in court with her hands folded and her eyes closed and listened to words like prior record and felony and gunshot wound. When the judge asked if she had anything to say, she said, "My son was kind." Her voice was a thin string across a canyon. Luke Carter got death. Ellie did not go to the first hearing. She did not go to the second. She stayed home and made soup and washed bowls that weren't dirty and listened to the clock because it was the only thing that kept moving. She tried to pray and felt like her words fell apart before they left her lips. When the church ladies brought casseroles, she took them and said thank you. And then she went into the backyard and watered the dead grass because it was something to do. Months passed. She returned to the library in March because a little boy named Teddy kept leaving her drawings of boats. "We can't sail if you're gone," he wrote under one. So she picked up her keys, went back to the stories, and tried to let words be a place to rest. One day a tall woman with a soft scarf around her neck came into the library and asked if she could speak to Miss Ellie. "I'm Chaplain Sarah," the woman said. "I work at the prison." Ellie's hands went cold again, the way they had on the night of the break-in. She pressed her fingers to the desk where a picture book showed a good bear sharing his honey. "I know where you work," she said. "Luke Carter asked me to visit you," Sarah said gently. "He asked for a letter, if you're willing. You don't have to read it or answer it. I can just bring it to your doorstep and take it back with me unopened if that's what you want. He said it's not to hurt you. He said it's to tell you something he should have said a long time ago." Ellie wanted to say no. She wanted to say no so loudly that the windows would rattle. But her mother's blanket of grief came to mind, the way you carry it and don't throw it away. She looked at Chaplain Sarah and saw a tired kindness in the woman's eyes, the kind you only get from sitting in hard rooms with crying people. "You can bring it," Ellie said. "I probably won't read it." She paused. "But you can bring it." The letter came in spring. It was on thin paper, folded neat. The handwriting was careful, like someone trying to step only on the safe parts of a broken floor. "Miss Hayes, I am writing because I should have written sooner. I am sorry. I don't have better words than that. I know sorry cannot be big enough for what I did or what I didn't stop. I have something I need to tell you, and I can only tell you in person. Please, if you can, see me. I will not ask twice. Luke." Ellie set the letter under the cookie jar and left it there as if it were a seed that might sprout if she forgot about it. She baked oatmeal cookies for the kids at school and for the quiet old man next door. She cut one cookie in half, ate one piece in the morning and one at night, like medicine. She waited a week. Then two. The world didn't change. Nothing got louder or softer. The letter didn't shout from under the jar, and it didn't disappear. So one evening, when the light was warm and the air had the sweet smell of cut grass, she picked up the phone number the chaplain had written and called. "Can I come?" she asked. "Are you sure?" the chaplain said. "If you come, you don't have to speak if you don't want to. You can leave any time." "Yes," Ellie said. "I'm sure." She was not sure. The first visit was like standing on a cliff and looking over and seeing how far it was to the bottom. The metal detector beeped. The guard's eyes were tired. The chairs were hard and blue. Luke looked smaller than he had in court, like the bars had pressed him into a different shape. He stood. He sat. He tried to smile, but the smile died on his face. "Miss Hayes," he said. The words were dry leaves. "Thank you for coming." Ellie found her voice hiding behind her teeth. "You asked me." "I did," he said. He swallowed. "I need to say it again. I'm sorry." The words fell between them like a plate that didn't break when it hit the floor. Ellie stared at them. She wanted to kick them away. She wanted to pick them up and see if they were real. Instead, she looked at Luke's hands. They were big and rough, the kind of hands that could build a deck or fix a car. The cuffs made two small bright circles on his wrists. "Why me?" she asked. "Why call me now?" Luke glanced at the guard, then back at Ellie. "Because I'm running out of time. Because I've told the truth to people who don't want to hear it. Because the person who pulled the trigger is walking in daylight, and I can't stand knowing that you're carrying a weight that belongs to someone else." Ellie's heart tripped over itself. Her mouth went dry. "Are you lying to me?" she asked. Her voice surprised her. It was stronger than she felt. "No," he said. He looked straight at her, and his eyes were the eyes of a boy who had lost his way in a store and finally found the right aisle. "I swear," he said, "on my mama's grave." He laughed once, a small broken laugh. "She doesn't even have a grave. We couldn't afford one. But I swear anyway. I was in your house. I planned to steal what I could and get out. It was supposed to be empty. Then he came. He had the gun. He panicked. Luke's voice cracked. I tried to stop it." Ellie felt the world slide a little. "Who?" she asked. Luke shook his head. "I can't say his name out loud," he whispered. "Not here. Not yet." He leaned forward. "Please come again. Please." Ellie left that day with her knees shaking. She sat in her car and watched the sun touch the barbed wire and turn it into silver thread for a minute. She thought of Daniel holding a broken chair and smiling. "We know where to start," he had said. She did not know where to start now. She did not know if Luke's words were a cruel trick or a key she didn't know how to turn. She went home and made grilled cheese the way Daniel liked it, with extra butter and a lid on the pan so the cheese melted properly. She placed a second plate across from her and then moved it away because she could not eat with a ghost. She turned on the radio softly so the house would feel less empty and less loud at the same time. That night, she dreamed of her old garden. In her dream, the soil was full of broken glass that looked like diamonds. Daniel stood at the fence and said, "We can't plant kindness in glass, Mama. We have to clear it first." She woke up with her heart shaking in her chest and her hands open, as if she'd been carrying too much in her sleep. She went back to the prison. Then again, Luke did not ask for forgiveness. He did not ask for tears. He asked for time. He talked about his childhood, about a trailer that leaked, a stepdad who drank, a mom who worked 2 jobs and still came home smiling when she could. He talked about the first time he stole, when he was 14 and hungry and couldn't shake the shame even after he ate. He talked about anger like it was a room he couldn't find the door out of. He said, "I'm not telling you this to make you feel bad for me. I'm telling you because I want you to see I'm a person, not just a headline. Your son was a person, too." Ellie listened. Sometimes she cried, quietly, into a paper tissue that felt like leaf skin. Sometimes she did not speak. Sometimes she told Luke tiny, soft things about Daniel. How he used to hum while he swept, how he could never keep track of his socks, how he'd whisper, "You okay, Mama?" when she coughed like she might break. She did not say the big things. Not yet. The big things sat at the edges of the room and watched. When the date came in the mail, Luke's date, Ellie held the letter under running water until the ink bled and made little blue rivers in her sink. She knew what dates meant. She had lived long enough to see birthdays turn into simple days, and holidays turn into days when the store was closed and you ate leftovers. But this date glowed like a red mark on a white wall. She went to church and lit a candle. She said, "God, I don't know how to love people right now. Help me." She waited, but no voice came down from anywhere. The candle just burned. Its small light shook and then stood straight. On the day of the final wish, the prison was colder than usual. The guards joked less. The floor shined more. Chaplain Sarah met Ellie at the gate and hugged her the way nurses hug, the kind of hug that holds you together but lets you breathe. "Whatever happens," Sarah said, "you can leave when you want." "I'll stay," Ellie said. "If he asked for me, I'll stay." Somewhere inside her, she knew that staying was a form of kindness. She didn't have to like it. She just had to do it. They searched her. They took her rosary and gave it back. They walked down halls that turned left and right too many times. The alarm lights on the walls were dark and quiet then. In the room with the glass, the chairs waited like open mouths. The clock clicked its tongue. When Luke stood and asked to see his victim, Ellie's heart forgot a step. She could have said the word no, and it would have been allowed to stay in the room like a small dog. But she said nothing, and the door opened, and she walked in. You already know what happened next. The lights, the siren, the dark. But you don't know what came just before the dark. It was a look. Luke looked at Ellie like he was handing her something he'd been carrying for too long. And Ellie looked back like she might take it, but wasn't sure where to put it, or if it would burn her hands. In the confusion, a guard's radio crackled, and a voice shouted, "Lockdown! Lockdown!" Someone swore under his breath. The warden reached for the wall panel. Chaplain Sarah whispered, "Stay with me," and took Ellie's hand. It was a small hand, old and strong. The siren cut through everything like a knife through cloth, and then the room went black. In the black, Ellie heard breathing. Not the kind that calms you. The kind that tells you the world has more people in it than you can see. She heard a clink of chain and a thud, as if someone had hit a knee on a metal bench. She heard a soft word she could not make out. She smelled dust and metal and the faint, sweet scent of the chaplain's scarf. The emergency lights came on a second later, thin, red, and not enough. The room was a different shape now, all edges and shadows. The clock was dead. The cameras blinked like weak stars. "Everyone stay where you are," the warden said. His voice tried to be big. It wasn't. Luke stood very still in the red glow, his mouth tight. his eyes bright like he'd swallowed a spark. He looked at Ellie again, one more time, like he could say a name with his eyes. No one heard the name, but someone else heard something. From the hallway, a deeper voice shouted a warning. A guard yanked the door open to see what was wrong. The door swung wide and banged the wall. In the same breath, a new door at the back of the room, one that Ellie hadn't even noticed before, clicked once, then twice, like a lock trying to choose. The warden snapped. Who opened that? No one answered. The door opened. A tall man stepped into the red light, and Ellie felt something shift in the air, like wind changing just before a storm. He wore a maintenance uniform and a cap pulled low. He had the easy walk of a person who belongs in a place, even if he doesn't. His eyes slid across the room and landed on Luke. The man smiled, very small, as if he found something he had lost. Luke's face changed. It was quick, but Ellie saw it. Fear, recognition, and then a hard, quiet courage like a nail through wood. "Warden," Luke said, his voice steady even with chains on his ankles. "That's him." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the man in the cap reached into his pocket. The guard shouted. Hands went to holsters. Chaplain Sarah pulled Ellie back. The room snapped tight like a rubber band. The man's hand came out of his pocket holding not a gun, but a folded piece of paper, the kind you get from a parking ticket or a note you shouldn't be passing in class. He tossed it. It fluttered through the red light and hit the glass by Luke's face. Luke flinched. The paper slid down, slow as a falling leaf, and came to rest at the base of the glass. "Pick it up," the man said softly. No one bent. No one breathed. The siren cut off. The silence that followed was worse. In the heavy quiet, Ellie heard the smallest sound, the paper crackling as it settled. That was when something broke, not a bone, not the glass, but the last thin string holding the room in place. The maintenance man reached again, fast this time. A guard shouted, "Down!" A shot cracked. The red light flickered. Ellie's rosary slipped from her fingers and scattered beads across the floor like rainfall. The sound of the gunshot hung in the air like a scream that refused to die. Then, silence. Thick, heavy, human silence. Miss Ellie's heart felt like it had cracked open inside her chest. Her hands were trembling so badly, she almost didn't realize Chaplain Sarah had pulled her to the floor behind the metal chair. The red emergency light kept flashing, on, off, painting the room like a nightmare that wouldn't decide whether to stay or go. "Everybody stay down," a guard shouted. Boots thundered. Radios crackled. Someone cursed under their breath. The smell of gunpowder crawled through the air. Ellie dared to lift her head just enough to see through the chaos. The man in the maintenance uniform was on his knees, clutching his shoulder. Blood darkened the gray fabric where the bullet had caught him. His cap had fallen off, revealing short brown hair slick with sweat. But what froze Ellie wasn't the blood, it was Luke. He was still standing. His cuffs gleamed under the red light. His face was pale, but his eyes were fixed on the wounded man, and for the first time since she had met him, he looked calm. "That's him," Luke said again, quieter this time, but with the kind of certainty that made even the guards pause. "That's the one who killed Daniel Hayes." The wounded man let out a bitter laugh and spat on the floor. "You don't know what you're talking about." Luke shook his head slowly. "I was there, Nick." The name dropped into the room like a stone into a pond. Ripples of realization moved across faces. The guards exchanged glances. The warden's brow furrowed. "Nick?" the warden asked sharply. "Nick Sanders?" One of the guards near the door stiffened. "Sir, he's been working maintenance here for almost 6 months. Came with the last contractor team." Ellie's breath caught. The world seemed to tilt sideways. Her son's killer, working here? In the same building where the wrong man was sentenced to die? Nick groaned, pressing his bloody shoulder. "You have no proof," he hissed. "Just a dying man's story." Luke's voice cracked with something raw and human. "You looked me in the eye that night. You said, 'He's gonna talk,' and you fired before I could stop you. I saw you, Nick. I see you now." The guards surrounded Nick, guns still drawn. One pressed a knee into his back. Another snapped handcuffs around his wrists. Ellie felt her knees weaken as she stood. Her rosary beads were scattered across the floor. She knelt shakily and began picking them up one by one. Her fingers brushed a small white bead, sticky with blood. She wasn't sure whose. "Ma'am," Chaplain Sarah whispered, touching her shoulder. "Are you okay?" Ellie nodded faintly, though her heart was racing. He told the truth. she murmured. All this time he told the truth. Hours later, the storm outside had started. Rain drummed against the prison windows. Inside, the warden's office smelled like coffee and wet shoes. Guards moved in and out, giving statements. Luke sat in the corner, still in cuffs, still silent. There was a faint bruise on his cheek where someone had pushed him down during the chaos. The warden leaned forward across his desk. "We'll need to verify everything you said," he told Luke. "If this checks out, son, you might be walking out of here a free man." Luke didn't smile. He just looked toward the small window, watching the rain slide down the glass. "Freedom," he said softly, "feels too big for me now." Miss Ellie sat across from him, her rosary clutched in both hands. "You saved my life in there," she said quietly. "If he had pulled that gun faster." Luke shook his head. "You don't owe me anything, ma'am." She met his eyes, and there was something fragile but strong between them, like two broken pieces of glass that somehow fit together. "Maybe not," she said, "but that doesn't mean I won't be kind." The door opened. A detective walked in, carrying a small plastic evidence bag. Inside was the folded piece of paper Nick had thrown before the shooting. "We found this," he said. "You'll want to see it." The warden unfolded it carefully. His eyes widened as he read. "Good Lord." He looked up at Ellie and then at Luke. "It's a confession. Signed." He wrote it. Sarah gasped. Ellie covered her mouth. Luke's eyes filled with tears for the first time. "I told you," he whispered. "I told you I didn't do it." Ellie rose slowly, tears streaming down her face. "I believe you, Luke." The warden's voice softened. "This changes everything. The state's going to have to reopen your case immediately." Luke let out a shaky breath and looked down. "I just wanted her to know," he said, nodding toward Ellie. "Even if they never let me out, I needed her to know." Ellie reached across the table and took his hand, the same hand that had once been shackled, judged, and feared. It was warm, human, trembling. For the first time since Daniel's death, she felt her heart open enough to let air in again. "I don't know how to forgive," she said, "but I think I know how to start." Luke nodded. "Maybe that's enough." The storm outside grew louder. A flash of lightning lit the room in silver for one brief, holy second. And then, the lights flickered again. The warden frowned. "What now?" A voice crackled through the radio. "We've got a problem down in Holding. The suspect, Nick Sanders, he's gone." Everyone froze. "What do you mean gone?" the warden demanded. The radio hissed. "He escaped, sir. He's armed." Ellie's rosary slipped from her hand again, scattering beads across the floor. Luke looked at her, then at the guards. His eyes hardened. "He's coming back," he said, "and this time he won't miss." The wind howled against the windows. Somewhere in the distance, an alarm began to wail again. The storm outside howled like a warning from heaven. Lightning flashed through the narrow windows of the prison, slicing across the gray walls. Everyone in the warden's office froze for a moment, staring at the crackling radio that had just delivered the impossible news. "Repeat that," the warden shouted, grabbing the radio. Static hissed. Then a breathless voice came through. "Nick Sanders escaped from Holding, sir. 2 guards are down. He's armed and heading toward the West Wing." The West Wing. That was where they were. Miss Ellie's heart began to thump so hard she could hear it in her ears. Chaplain Sarah gasped, pressing a trembling hand to her mouth. "Dear Lord," she whispered. "He's coming here." The warden barked orders into the radio. "Lock every exit. I want all corridors sealed. Do not, repeat, do not let him out of this building." Guards ran past the office door, their boots echoing like thunder. Somewhere down the hall, another alarm wailed to life, its shrill cry mixing with the storm outside. Luke stood up from his chair, the chains on his ankles clinking. "Warden, you have to move her out of here," he said, nodding toward Ellie. "He's not coming for me. He's coming for her." The warden's eyes narrowed. "How would you know that?" "Because he's scared," Luke said, voice steady. "He knows I told the truth. He knows she's the only witness now." Ellie's hands were trembling, but she lifted her chin. "I'm not afraid," she said quietly. "I've lived through worse than this." Luke looked at her, his expression full of something close to admiration. "You don't know men like him, ma'am. He's desperate. And desperate men don't think, they just destroy." Before the warden could answer, the hallway lights flickered again, once, twice, then went out completely. The emergency red lights returned, bathing the corridor in a blood-colored glow. Then came footsteps. Slow, deliberate, getting closer. Everyone went still. Is that? Sarah began to whisper, but Luke motioned for silence. The door handle to the warden's office turned slowly. Click. Stay behind me, the warden said, drawing his weapon. He signaled to 2 guards to flank the door. The handle turned again. This time, the sound of it scraping metal made Ellie's stomach twist. Then bang. The door burst open. A guard fired once, hitting the wall. The man in the doorway stumbled forward, drenched in rain, a dark shadow against the red light. It wasn't Nick. It was another guard, face pale, eyes wide with terror. He's coming, the man panted. He shot Lewis. He's heading straight this way, he said. A gunshot cut his sentence short. The man fell to the floor with a thud. Screams erupted. Sarah grabbed Ellie and pulled her behind the desk. The warden returned fire through the open doorway, shouting orders. Luke crouched low, his cuffs rattling as he crawled toward the fallen guard. He picked up the guard's key ring with shaking hands. Luke, the warden yelled. Stay back. But Luke wasn't listening. He twisted one key into his cuffs until he found the right one. Click. And the metal snapped open. He threw the chains aside. Don't do anything stupid, the warden shouted. Luke rose slowly. His face was calm, but his eyes were fire. You want to keep her alive? He said. Then let me help. The warden hesitated, torn between duty and survival. He could see something honest in Luke's face, something that didn't belong to a killer. He nodded once. Fine, but you stay where I can see you. They moved fast. Luke helped Ellie to her feet, his hand steady on her arm. Stay close, he said softly. If we make it through this, I'll explain everything. Ellie nodded, her voice caught in her throat. They slipped out of the office, the hall stretching long and empty under the flashing red lights. The floor gleamed wet, reflecting their shadows. Every few seconds, thunder shook the walls. Somewhere behind them, they could hear Nick's voice echoing faintly, calm and cold. You think you can hide, Luke? He called. You think a little truth can save you now? Ellie's breath quickened. He's playing with us, she whispered. Luke nodded. He always does. He talks before he shoots. They reached the stairwell door. Luke pushed it open carefully and peeked down. The stairwell was dim, lit only by one flickering bulb. Rainwater was leaking through the window at the bottom, pooling on the steps. Basement leads to the loading bay, Luke said. If we can get there, we can lock the door behind us. The warden gestured for them to move. Go. As they descended the stairs, another sound rose behind them. Footsteps, heavier this time. Nick. The echo of his boots matched the rhythm of their panic. When they reached the last flight, a shot rang out. The bullet slammed into the wall inches above Ellie's head. She screamed, ducking instinctively. Luke spun around, spotting Nick at the top of the stairs, gun raised, his wounded shoulder soaked in blood, but his grin wide and wild. Going somewhere, preacher boy? Nick sneered. Luke moved fast. He shoved Ellie to the ground just as another bullet flew past. The warden fired back, grazing Nick's arm. Nick ducked behind the railing, cursing. You think you can save her, huh? You couldn't even save her son. Luke froze. His breath hitched. Don't you dare say his name. Nick laughed, a cold, hollow laugh. Daniel, wasn't it? The boy with the big eyes? He begged me not to shoot. You remember that? Ellie gasped. Tears blurred her vision. Her heart cracked all over again. But this time, anger burned through the pain. Stop it, she shouted. Nick smirked. Your son died begging, ma'am. And this man here, your new little hero, just stood there and watched. Something inside Luke snapped. He charged up the steps, grabbing the railing and tackling Nick before he could fire again. The gun clattered to the floor, sliding down the stairs. Both men struggled in the narrow space, fists landing, boots slipping in the rainwater. Luke! Sarah screamed. Stop! But Luke wasn't listening. He pinned Nick against the wall, breathing hard. You killed an innocent boy. Nick grinned, blood in his teeth. So what? He wasn't my first. Luke raised his fist and froze. He looked at Ellie, standing below, watching with tears streaming down her face. For a long second, time slowed. He dropped his fist. No, he said quietly. Not again. I won't let hate win. Nick snarled and shoved him backward. Luke stumbled, hit the railing, and fell. Luke! Ellie screamed. He crashed down the stairs, hitting the metal steps before landing hard on the concrete floor. His head struck the ground, and he went still. The sound of the rain filled the silence. Ellie stared up at Nick. who wiped the blood from his lip and laughed low. "Now it's just you, lady," he said, picking up his gun again. "You and me." He started down the steps slowly, each footstep echoing in the stairwell. Ellie backed away until her back hit the wall. Her knees were shaking. Nick raised the gun, aiming it at her chest. "Your son looked just like you when he died," he whispered. Ellie closed her eyes and whispered a single word, "God." And before he could pull the trigger, a sound echoed from behind him. A low groan. Nick turned, just in time to see Luke, bloody, bruised, barely standing, rising to his feet, gripping a broken handcuff chain in his fist like a weapon. The chain glinted in the dim light. Luke's voice was a growl. "Not this time." He swung. The chain struck Nick's hand, the gun firing upward into the ceiling. Sparks flew. The bullet ricocheted off the wall. The fight began again. The chain hit hard. The clang echoed up the stairwell, louder than the thunder outside. Nick stumbled backward, his gun sliding out of reach as it clattered down the wet floor. Luke, bleeding and panting, swung again. The second hit caught Nick across the arm, and he fell to one knee, gasping. Miss Ellie pressed herself against the wall, watching the two men fight like shadows of the same storm, one born of guilt, the other of hate. Nick tried to lunge, but Luke dodged and grabbed him by the collar, slamming him into the railing. "You took his life," Luke shouted, voice breaking. "You destroyed everything." Nick's lip curled. "You think you're any better? You were there. You watched. I was too scared to stop you," Luke spat back. "But I won't be scared again." Nick twisted, catching Luke across the face with his elbow. Luke staggered backward, clutching his jaw. His vision blurred. Lights, red and white, flickering like broken lightning. Nick saw his chance. He rushed forward, tackling Luke to the ground. They hit the wet concrete with a crack. Miss Ellie screamed. "Stop, please." Neither of them heard. Nick reached for the gun, but Luke kicked it away. The weapon spun across the floor and landed at Ellie's feet. Her breath froze. For a moment, everything went still. Luke's groaning, Nick's labored breathing, the thunder outside, everything. Her hands shook as she bent down. She picked up the gun. It was heavier than she imagined. The metal felt alive, like it could hear her heartbeat. Nick looked up, saw her holding it, and smirked. "You won't shoot," he said. "You're just like your son, too kind." Tears streamed down her face. "You don't know what I am anymore." Nick's grin faltered. "Don't do it," Luke whispered, blood on his lip. "Don't let him turn you into what he is." Ellie's hands trembled harder. She remembered Daniel's voice. "Mama, broken doesn't mean over." The thunder rolled again. The power flickered once more. Then, the gunshot exploded. The echo bounced off every wall, then died away. Nick slumped backward, his face pale, eyes wide, but not from pain. The bullet had missed. It had grazed the wall beside him. Ellie dropped the gun and sank to her knees, sobbing. I can't live with another death." Nick growled, staggering to his feet, rage twisting his bloody face. "You should have finished it." He reached behind him, pulling a knife from his belt. Luke saw the blade glint and moved before thinking. He lunged forward, tackling Nick again. The knife scraped across Luke's shoulder, cutting deep, but he didn't stop. He pushed Nick backward, forcing him toward the railing. The two of them struggled, their feet slipping on the slick floor. "Luke, stop," Ellie cried. Nick grinned, even through the blood. "You'll never get out of here alive." Then, lightning flashed through the narrow window, and the thunder that followed shook the building. The railing gave way with a scream of metal. Both men toppled over. "No!" Ellie screamed, rushing forward. She reached the edge of the broken railing just in time to see Luke hanging by one arm, his hand gripping the remaining bar. Nick dangled below him, one hand clutching Luke's wrist, the other scraping at the air. "Help me!" Nick gasped, eyes wide with terror. "Don't let me fall." Ellie's heart pounded. The storm raged behind her. Luke's muscles trembled as he tried to hold on to the man who had ruined both their lives. "You'll pull us both down." Luke grunted. "Please." Nick's voice broke. "I didn't mean to." But Luke's face hardened. "You meant every bit of it." For a moment, their eyes locked, the killer and the condemned, bound together by pain. Then, Luke's grip slipped. Nick fell. The sound was short and final, a body hitting concrete below. Ellie covered her mouth, shaking. Luke hauled himself back up, blood dripping from his shoulder. His breath came in ragged gasps. He looked at her, eyes full of sorrow. "I didn't want it to end like that," he said softly. Ellie couldn't speak. Her knees gave way, and she sank to the ground, her rosary beads scattering again across the wet floor. Above them, sirens wailed. Guards rushed in, shouting orders, flashlights cutting through the red gloom. Two of them surrounded Luke, guns drawn. "Don't move," one barked. Luke raised his hands weakly. "It's over," he said, voice hollow. "He's gone." The warden appeared moments later, soaked from the rain. He took one look at the scene, the broken railing, the lifeless body below, and sighed heavily. "Get medical for the prisoner," he ordered. "And someone cover the body." Sarah knelt beside Ellie, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "It's done now," she whispered. "It's finally done." But Ellie didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed on Luke, who sat against the wall, bleeding and silent. In that moment, she didn't see a murderer or a criminal. She saw a man who had carried someone else's sin for too long. As the guards led Luke away, their flashlights flashing across his tired face, he turned once, just once, to look at her, and she understood what he was saying without words. "I'm sorry." She nodded slowly. "I forgive you." But just as she began to breathe again, one of the guards shouted from the lower floor, near Nick's fallen body. "Sir, you better come see this." The warden rushed over. "What is it?" he asked. The guard pointed with a trembling hand. "There's something in his pocket. A list, a name list." The warden took the crumpled, blood-stained paper and unfolded it. His face went pale. Sarah leaned closer. "What does it say?" The warden's eyes darkened. "It's a hit list." He looked up at Ellie, then at Luke. "Your son wasn't the only one," he said quietly. "There are 5 other names on this list." Ellie's heart sank. "What?" The warden turned the paper around. The names were barely legible in the smudged ink, but one stood out clearly at the bottom. "Eleanor Hayes." Sarah gasped. "He was supposed to kill you too." Ellie's hands flew to her mouth. Luke, still bleeding, stared at her from where he sat. He came back to finish it. The room fell silent again, save for the soft rumble of thunder outside. Ellie looked at Luke, the man she once wished dead, and realized something that sent a shiver through her soul. He hadn't just asked to see his victim that day. He'd asked to save her. The rain poured harder that night, washing blood and dust down the prison steps like the earth itself was trying to forget what had happened inside. But some things you don't wash away. Some things stay, even when the rain is done. Miss Ellie sat in a gray hospital room 2 floors above the prison infirmary, her blanket pulled tight around her shoulders. It was nearly midnight. Outside the small window, flashes of lightning painted the sky white, then black, then white again. Across from her, Luke lay on a narrow bed, his shoulder wrapped in clean white bandages. His face was pale, his body weak, but his eyes were awake, alert in that quiet way of men who've had to fight for every bit of peace they ever got. They hadn't spoken in over an hour. There was nothing left to say, and too much to say at once. Then Ellie broke the silence. Her voice was small but steady. "When I first saw you in that orange uniform, I wanted to hate you. I prayed for God to make me strong enough to look you in the eye and not feel anything at all." Luke turned his head slowly. "And now," Ellie sighed, "now I don't want to feel nothing. Because nothing means I stopped being human." Luke stared at the ceiling. "You're a good woman, Miss Ellie." "No," she said. "Just a tired one." She paused. "But maybe that's enough." The door opened quietly. Chaplain Sarah stepped in, her raincoat dripping. "They've confirmed it," she said softly. The list Nick had in his pocket. The first 4 names belonged to people from old break-ins, people who testified against a man named Everett Cole. Cole's in state prison now. Nick was his cleaner. Luke frowned. "Cleaner?" Sarah nodded grimly. "The kind who erases evidence." "We're people." Ellie's breath caught. "And me?" Sarah hesitated. "You were the last name. Probably because your son recognized him that night. He wanted to make sure there were no witnesses left." The room went quiet again. The storm outside moaned against the window. Luke turned his head toward Ellie. "He would have come for you no matter what. I knew if I asked to see you, he'd show up." Ellie blinked. "You planned this." Luke nodded weakly. "Not the fighting, not the blood, but I knew if word got out that I was going to tell the truth, he wouldn't let me live to say it. He'd come himself. I just didn't expect he'd walk straight into a prison to finish the job." Ellie leaned back, clutching her blanket. "You risked your life, just to make sure he didn't take mine." Luke looked down. "Maybe I owed you that. Maybe I owed your son that." Sarah stepped closer to the window, watching the rain run down the glass like tears. The governor's already been informed. The warden's writing his report. Luke, you might walk free after this. Luke let out a hollow laugh. Free? I've been locked up so long, I don't even know what that means anymore. Ellie smiled faintly. It means starting again, even if it's small. Luke turned to her. And you? What does starting again mean for you? Ellie looked down at her rosary, its white beads still stained with tiny spots of red. Maybe it means learning to forgive without forgetting. Maybe it means letting go of the anger, but not the lesson. They sat in silence for a while, the sound of the rain filling the spaces between them. Then, a knock at the door. The warden stepped in, his uniform still damp, his face drawn from exhaustion. Luke Carter, he said, voice flat but not unkind. You've got visitors. Luke frowned. Visitors? The warden nodded toward the hallway. A woman and a boy. She says her husband was one of the names on the list Nick carried. She said she came to thank you. Luke blinked. Thank me. The warden nodded. You saved her without even knowing it. Ellie glanced at him, a small smile tugging at her lips. Seems you've been saving people without trying. Luke shook his head. I'm no hero. The warden crossed his arms. Heroes don't think they are. He opened the door wider. A woman stepped in, early 30s, wearing a long green coat, still wet from the rain. Her son, maybe 10 years old, held her hand tightly. She looked nervous but determined. Mr. Carter, she said softly, I heard what you did. My husband testified against that man, Everett Cole. We didn't even know someone was after us. If you hadn't spoken up, I might be. She couldn't finish the sentence. Luke tried to sit up, but Sarah placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. Easy. The woman wiped her eyes. You saved more than yourself tonight. You saved us too. Thank you. Her son looked at Luke and whispered, Were you scared? Luke smiled faintly. Yeah, but I did it anyway. The boy nodded like he understood. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. I made you this. He handed it to Luke. Inside was a simple drawing, a man standing in the rain, holding a lantern. Underneath it, the boy had written in crooked letters, Light winds. Luke stared at it for a long moment, then whispered, I'll keep it. The woman smiled through her tears, nodded to Ellie, and left quietly with her son. When the door closed, Ellie said, You see that? That boy drew hope. Luke smiled weakly. Yeah, and it looks a lot like your son did when he smiled. Ellie's eyes glistened. Maybe Daniel would have wanted this ending. Not vengeance, just truth. Luke nodded. Truth and peace. Two things I never thought I'd get. A long pause filled the room, warm and quiet this time. Then the warden cleared his throat. Luke, he said, I just got the call. The governor signed an emergency stay. Your execution's canceled pending retrial. Looks like you're getting your second chance. Luke blinked. You mean? I'm not dying tomorrow. The warden smiled tiredly. Not tomorrow. Maybe not ever. Ellie reached out her hand. Then live, Luke. Don't waste what Daniel lost. Luke hesitated, then took her hand. I'll try. As he said it, the storm outside finally began to fade. The thunder softened, the lightning dimmed, and the rain turned into a gentle drizzle against the window pane. For the first time in years, morning light began to break through the clouds. But just as peace seemed to settle over the room, the warden's radio crackled again. Sir, we've got a situation, a voice said. The transport van that was supposed to move the evidence. It never made it to the station. The warden frowned. Never made it. Static. Then, they found it on the highway, doors open. The driver's gone. Everyone froze. Sarah's voice trembled. You don't think. The warden's face darkened. Someone doesn't want that evidence to leave this place. Luke's heart dropped. Everett Cole, he muttered. He's still calling the shots. Ellie's fingers tightened around her rosary. Then it's not over. Luke turned toward the rain-streaked window, his reflection pale against the glass. No, he said softly. It's just beginning. The next morning came slow and gray. Fog rolled over the prison yard like smoke after a fire. Guards moved quietly, their radios low, their eyes restless. The storm had passed, but something heavier lingered in the air, something no wind could carry away. Luke sat by the hospital window, staring at the faint sunlight breaking through the mist. He hadn't slept. His shoulder throbbed where the knife had cut him, but his mind hurt worse. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Nick falling, saw Daniel's face, saw Miss Ellie crying on the cold stairwell floor. He pressed his hand to the window, the glass cool against his skin. Light winds, the boy had written. But right now, it didn't feel like it. The door opened behind him. The warden stepped in, a fresh coffee in one hand, a folder in the other. "You're up early," he said. "Didn't sleep," Luke replied. The warden nodded. "Can't blame you. You've had the kind of night most people don't live through." Luke managed a faint smile. "You still think I'm lucky?" "Alive means lucky," the warden said simply. "And right now, we need every bit of luck we can get." He handed Luke the folder. Inside were photos, blurry images of a white van abandoned off a rural highway. The rear doors hung open, the inside scattered with papers and spilled coffee. This was the transport that carried the case files, the warden explained. Every document that proved Nick's connection to Everett Cole was in that van. Luke frowned. "You said the driver was gone?" "Still missing," the warden said. "No sign of him. Whoever took him didn't leave much behind. Just this." He held up a small scrap of paper sealed in a plastic bag. A single word was written in thick black ink. "Unfinished." Luke stared at it for a long time. "That's his handwriting," he said softly. "Cole's." The warden nodded grimly. "We traced the ink. Same brand he used to sign letters from prison. Looks like he's not done cleaning up." Luke clenched his jaw. "He'll come for her again." The warden sighed. "That's what we're afraid of." Just then, the door opened again. Miss Ellie walked in, wearing the same gray sweater she'd worn the day before. Her face looked older somehow, like she'd aged a few years overnight, but her eyes still held that quiet, steady flame. "You're not keeping me in that cell block," she said before anyone could speak. "If there's a man out there trying to finish what he started, I'm not hiding under a bed waiting for it." Luke turned. "Miss Ellie, you don't have to." "I do," she said firmly, "because I refuse to be afraid of another sunrise. Not after everything God's already brought me through." The warden studied her for a moment, then nodded. "We'll move you into protective custody until the state sends a unit. You'll both be under guard." "Both?" Ellie asked. Luke hesitated. "You mean?" The warden folded his arms. "You're officially under witness protection until Cole's found. You two are the only people who can confirm his connection to Nick." Luke blinked. "So we're supposed to what?" "Hide together." The warden gave a half-smile. "Think of it as surviving together. You're not the only one who deserves a second chance, Carter." Ellie's lips twitched like she wanted to smile, but couldn't quite manage it. "Well," she said, "I've shared my kitchen with worse men." Luke chuckled quietly. "I'm sure you have." By that afternoon, they were sitting in the back of a black government SUV, headed toward a safe house on the outskirts of town. The city rolled by, gas stations, diners, rain-soaked billboards. Ellie sat by the window, watching the clouds drift over the highway. "It's strange," she murmured. "I prayed for justice, but I never thought justice would ride beside me in handcuffs." Luke laughed under his breath. "I'm not sure that's justice yet." "Maybe not," she said softly. "But maybe it's grace." He looked at her. "Grace?" She nodded. "Grace is when someone who doesn't deserve peace finally gets a piece of it anyway." Luke was quiet for a moment. "Then I hope grace is real." "It is," Ellie said. "You're breathing proof." He smiled, but before he could reply, the SUV slowed. The driver frowned. "We've got a roadblock ahead," he said into the radio. "Doesn't look official." The warden's voice crackled through the speaker. "What kind of roadblock?" "Two unmarked sedans, black. No plates." Luke's stomach twisted. "Cole's men." The driver swore under his breath. "Hang on." He spun the wheel hard. The SUV screeched, tires sliding on wet pavement as they turned onto a narrow dirt road flanked by trees. Behind them, the black sedans followed, fast. "Get down," the driver shouted. Bullets shattered the rear window. Glass rained across the seats. Ellie ducked, covering her head. Luke grabbed her and pulled her lower, shielding her as best he could. "Keep driving," he yelled. "I'm trying." The SUV bounced hard over the muddy road. A bullet hit the side mirror, sending sparks flying. Another clipped the roof. Ellie clutched her rosary, whispering, "Lord, if this is our time, let it not be in vain." Luke looked at her, and then at the glove compartment. "There a gun in there?" The driver gritted his teeth. "Yeah, Glock 9. One clip." Luke reached over, grabbed it, and checked the chamber. His injured shoulder burned as he leaned toward the back window. The sedans were closing in. He took a deep breath and fired. The first shot hit the front car's windshield. The second missed. The third hit a tire, sending the car spinning off into the ditch. The second sedan swerved to avoid it, fishtailing on the slick road. "Nice shooting for a man in a sling," the driver shouted. "Luck," Luke grunted. "And anger." The driver hit the gas, the engine roaring. "We're almost there." "Where?" Ellie asked. "Safe house up ahead." But before they could reach it, a third car, a black pickup, appeared out of nowhere, blocking the road completely. "Brace," the driver yelled. The SUV slammed into the truck with a deafening crash. Metal screamed. Airbags exploded. The world went white. When the smoke cleared, Ellie was conscious but bleeding from a cut on her forehead. The driver groaned, pinned by the steering wheel. Luke's vision swam. Pain shot through his shoulder like fire. He blinked, dazed. A figure stepped out of the pickup. Tall, broad, calm. Everett Cole. The man himself. He wore a black coat, his hair slicked back, his eyes cold and clear. He walked slowly toward the wreck, the rain dripping from his collar like oil. Luke tried to lift the gun again, but his hand was shaking. Cole smiled faintly. "You've caused me a lot of trouble, son." Luke gritted his teeth. "Good." Cole crouched down beside the shattered window. "I admire your bravery. It's wasted, but admirable." His eyes shifted to Ellie. "And you must be the famous Miss Hayes, the mother who forgave the wrong man." Ellie's lips trembled, but she didn't look away. "You killed my boy." Cole smiled wider. "I did what needed doing. Your son saw what he shouldn't have seen. The world's built on silence, Miss Hayes. People like me make sure it stays that way." He reached into his coat and pulled out a silver revolver. "Don't worry," he said softly. "I'll make it quick." Luke's hand moved before his mind did. He lunged across the seat, slamming his shoulder into Cole's arm. The gun fired. Once, loud enough to shake the trees, and the bullet tore through the driver's door. Cole stumbled back, losing balance. Luke tackled him to the ground outside the wreck, both men slipping in the mud. "Run!" Luke shouted to Ellie. "Go!" But Ellie didn't move. She reached for the fallen revolver. Cole shoved Luke off and stood, pointing the Glock that had fallen near the car. He aimed at Ellie. "You should have stayed home, old woman." She froze. But before he could fire, Luke threw himself in front of her. The gun went off. The echo ripped through the forest. Luke fell to the ground. Ellie screamed. Cole straightened, breathing hard, his face twisted with fury. "That's what happens to heroes," he muttered. But before he could turn away, the sound of sirens cut through the trees. Dozens of flashing lights broke through the fog. State troopers, their guns drawn, their voices shouting, "Drop it!" Cole spun around, furious, and raised his weapon, but a dozen red dots lit up his chest. He hesitated. Then he smiled, cold and slow. "Too late," he said, and pulled the trigger again. But this time, it wasn't his gun that fired. The sharp crack came from behind him, from Ellie. Cole staggered, eyes wide, a dark bloom spreading across his coat. He fell forward into the mud. The forest went still. Ellie stood there, her hands trembling, the revolver smoking in her grip. "Justice," she whispered through her tears. She dropped the gun and knelt beside Luke. His shirt was soaked in blood, his breathing shallow. She pressed her shaking hands against the wound, whispering, "Stay with me, Luke. Please stay." He opened his eyes weakly, managing the faintest smile. Yes, light really does win. Rain still whispered through the trees as paramedics rushed through the wreckage. Red and blue lights painted the forest floor, flashing across bent metal, broken glass, and the body of Everett Cole lying face down in the mud. The nightmare was finally over, but for Miss Ellie, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like an ending that hurt to breathe. She knelt beside Luke, her shaking hands pressed against the wound on his side. His blood was warm and sticky against her palms. "Stay with me, Luke," she whispered again and again, like a prayer she refused to stop saying. "Don't you leave me too." Luke tried to smile, though his lips trembled. "You always boss people around like this?" She let out a choked laugh, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Only the ones I care about." "Guess that means I'm in trouble," he murmured, his voice barely audible over the sirens. A paramedic crouched beside them. "We've got him, ma'am. You need to let go." Ellie hesitated, then slowly lifted her hands away. Her palms were covered in red. Luke's blood. And yet, somehow, it didn't scare her. It only reminded her that he was still alive, still human. They lifted Luke onto a stretcher, moving fast toward the ambulance. Ellie followed behind. clutching her rosary, whispering a silent plea to the God who'd already taken too much from her. "Please," she said under her breath, "not this one too." Hours later, the storm had faded into a quiet drizzle. The sky was pale blue now, and the air smelled like wet pine. The hospital hallway buzzed softly with machines, footsteps, and whispered voices. Miss Ellie sat by Luke's bed again. Only this time, he was unconscious. His chest rose and fell under the white hospital blanket, slow but steady. A fresh bandage wrapped around his ribs, and his arm rested limp by his side. Sarah entered quietly, her coat still damp from the rain. "He's stable," she said softly. "They said the bullet missed his lung by half an inch." Ellie let out a shaky breath. "Half an inch," she repeated. "That's how close God sits when he's not done with someone." Sarah smiled gently. "That's a beautiful way to put it." Ellie turned to her. "He saved my life twice. Once by truth, and once by blood. I can't even find the right prayer for that." Sarah sat beside her. "Then don't pray with words. Sit in the quiet and let gratitude be your prayer." They sat like that for a long while. Two women, one old, one young, watching the man who had carried their burdens in ways they didn't ask for. At sunrise, Luke stirred. His eyelids fluttered. "Miss Ellie," he whispered, weak but alive. She leaned forward, smiling through tears. "You're still here. Guess the good Lord wasn't done with me," he said softly. Ellie nodded. "No, he wasn't. You've still got stories to write with your life." Luke blinked slowly. "What happens now?" She reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "Now you live. You do all the things you thought you'd never get to do again. And when people ask you why you're still standing, you tell them it's because forgiveness isn't weakness, it's survival." Luke smiled faintly, eyes wet. "You think they'll listen?" She brushed a tear from his cheek. "Someone will. Maybe someone who needs to." 3 weeks later, Luke Carter walked out of the state hospital with the sun on his face and no chains on his wrists. The court had overturned his conviction. The governor's office had issued a public apology. But Luke didn't care for headlines or handshakes. He cared about quiet mornings, clean air, and the sound of his name spoken without suspicion. Miss Ellie was waiting for him by the gate, wearing her old gray sweater and holding a brown paper bag. "I made sandwiches," she said with a smile. "You can't start freedom on an empty stomach." Luke laughed softly, that same tired laugh she'd come to know. "You're something else, Miss Ellie. And you're a miracle," she said. "Don't you forget that." They sat on a park bench just outside the prison grounds, the air cool and fresh after weeks of rain. Luke unwrapped a sandwich, peanut butter and jelly, just like Daniel used to love. He smiled. "You remembered." "I remember everything," she said quietly. They ate in silence for a while. Then Ellie spoke again. "I keep thinking about what Daniel would have said if he saw all this. I think he'd be proud of you." Luke's throat tightened. "I don't deserve that." "Maybe not," she said. "But grace doesn't ask if you do." He looked at her, really looked at her, the lines on her face, the light in her eyes. She was no longer just the mother of his victim. She was the proof that forgiveness could rebuild what hate tried to destroy. "I don't know how to thank you," he said. "Then don't," she said. "Just go live good." Luke nodded. "I will." He looked out at the open road ahead. "You know what's strange?" he said quietly. "For the first time in years, I'm not afraid of tomorrow." Ellie smiled, tears filling her eyes again. "That's because tomorrow finally belongs to you." They sat there until the sun began to warm the ground beneath their feet. Two people who had both lost everything and somehow found something greater, peace. When they finally stood, Ellie handed him a folded piece of paper. "It's Daniel's favorite verse," she said. "He used to keep it on his desk." Luke unfolded it carefully. The words were handwritten, faded but clear. "Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good." Romans 12, verse 21. He smiled. "Seems he knew something we didn't." "He always did," Ellie whispered. They said their goodbyes there, under a sky so wide it made the past feel small. Luke walked away down the road, his shadow long in the morning light, the verse still in his hand. Ellie watched until he was gone, her heart heavy and light all at once. And for the first time since her son's death, she whispered not a prayer of sorrow, but of thanks. "Thank you, God," she said softly, "for the mercy that came wearing chains." Then she turned toward home, her rosary warm in her hand, her steps slow but sure. Because some endings aren't really endings. They're beginnings that hurt a little first.